So you're thinking about buying a home in 2026. Now what? Well, in today's episode, we're going back to the heart of what the educated home buyer is. We're going to teach you about how to buy a home. Now, this episode isn't about why to buy or should you buy. It's about how to actually do it without guesswork, without FOMO, without stress. We're going to walk you through the exact process that smart buyers use. We help a lot of people here on the Educated Home Buyer, and we want to help you too. So this is going to go from the first call to the final walkthrough and show you what not to do so that you don't get blindsided along the way.
Something, Jeb, that is really helpful for me when I'm planning on a project, something that's multi-step, something that's important, like buying a home that is going to be long-term and have a big outcome, is to think in terms of what it doesn't look like. So before we jump into what it should look like, how you should go about this, let's talk about some of the big pitfalls that people fall into. And what I would say in today's day and age, probably the easiest one is falling in love with a property, sometimes through your phone or computer by finding something on Zillow or Redfin. It's easy. It's low risk. So a lot of people will set up searches. Hey, I want to be in this zip code. I want to be in this school district. So they set it up in the app, and just one day they look and the app has come up with the perfect home. They haven't done any homework. Maybe their lease isn't up. They're not pre-approved. They haven't saved quite as much money as they want. They've got a tax return coming that they need for the down payment, but this is the perfect home. And now we move heaven and earth to make it happen to get into that property. When in reality, there are a lot of perfect properties. When my wife and I bought ours, 23 years ago, we missed out by a day and were the first runner-up on a home right around the corner from us. And after being in the neighborhood for 23 years, we realized we were meant to be in our home. So just remember, we don't want to obsess or fall in love with a property. Probably the bigger one, or another one, Jeb, that I see here in the market is people saying, as soon as rates hit X, I'm going to do this. It really shouldn't be about market conditions, right? And we're going to go through what it should be about, but it's not about, hey, I'm going to buy when home prices come down 5%, because you won't. It's not going to be when I buy when rates get to this point. It could be I'm going to buy next year when I get my raise or when my bonus comes in. But these things that you have no control over, externalities, as we call them, are things that I wouldn't get focused on. What are some of the other things that you see buyers getting hung up on and making mistakes that cause them to get off on the wrong foot?
Well, instead of just going down a list here, Josh, I think, the conversation for me a lot of times starts like this. Somebody calls me, gets referred to me, finds me online, whatever, and they reach out and they say, hey, Jeb, we just went to an open house this weekend. We found a property that we love. We want to write an offer. And first questions I start asking before we really get into any detail is, okay, tell me a little bit about yourself. Have you been pre-approved? Nope, we have not been pre-approved. Okay. Where are you in the process? So it's doing the steps backwards, if you will, to some degree, right? It's going out, shopping for homes, open houses, doing all of the things that you really shouldn't be doing until you've decided that, yes, we are buying a home. Yes, we know we're pre-approved. Yes, we know this is the price range we're in. And then going out and looking at homes. Again, people out, they find the property, they fall in love, and then a lot of times something happens and goes, well, they either can't qualify for that price point, or maybe they can, but the mortgage is too high. So it's working backwards from the process. And a lot of these things that we're talking about here, that the list that we've created is essentially a buildup of all of that, is all of the things that people have done prior to actually writing out a plan, writing out a budget, and starting with some of the basics in mind.
Well, it's funny, Jeb. One of the most common comments that I get from people that we close, people who come through the workshops that you and I do, people who've been listening to this podcast for a long time, is they'll say, it really was kind of a non-event. It was super easy. And it is when you've done the legwork, when you've done the prep work. And I'm not saying you listen to Jeb and Josh and we tell you exactly how to do it. I'm saying you do the legwork to get your ducks in a row. Because at that point, you're just connecting the dots. You know what to expect. You know what comes next. You know what's important. You know what is essential, but not as urgent or important. So let's start with where we always start, Jeb, knowing your why. I think that is before you do any of the steps, even before pre-approval, before calling Jeb because they found the perfect listing, before making a signed call to the realtor that just has that perfect home in their neighborhood that came up. We got to know why we're doing this now. And hopefully you have answered this, but a lot of times, that phone call that you said you had, okay, where are you at? What are you going through? and they really haven't thought it through. It's just, hey, I would love to own a home, and that's an awesome home, which those are good reasons where to start, but we got to know the why and what's going on in your life that says this is the right time to do it. All right, just wanted to take a quick minute to say thanks, amigos. It means so much to us that you spend your time here with us every week. When we started the show, it was just a couple of guys trying to make sense of the real estate and mortgage world, and now we have thousands of you showing up every week to learn, share, and laugh with us. That is truly wild. And honestly, we're just getting started. If you've been listening for a while and haven't hit follow yet, go ahead and smash that button. Less than a third of our regular listeners have, and it helps us grow the show more than you might think. Our goals here haven't changed. Keep finding the best guests, the best info, and the best ways to help you navigate your path from educated home buyer to educated homeowner. Once again, thank you. We're grateful you're here, and we can't wait to keep it rolling.
Well, Josh, you and I work entirely different. You plan everything out. You get into a lot of detail on things before you make a decision. I shoot first, ask questions later, right? So a lot of my videos, a lot of the topics that I cover are mistakes, things I've gone through myself that I look back and go, well, shit, had I done that a little bit differently, I probably would have done it differently to some degree. And so I would say that it's all okay, but there's a better way to do things, and that better way is essentially what we're walking you through today, because that's where we've seen the most success. That's where we've seen the least amount of stress. People coming out on the other side, giving us feedback, going, "Oh yeah, that wasn't that bad," versus the other direction, and there's a lot of stress, a lot of buildup, a lot of emotion, so on and so forth. So, with that said, Josh, knowing your why is important. Personally for me, let's go back to 2012. Wife and I had just gotten married, pregnant with our first child, the first of three boys. And we were in a 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Huntington Beach. Spacious apartment, probably, if I had to guess, 800 to 1,000 square feet. I mean, at that time, pretty good size for us. Upstairs. And we were looking around going, okay, we have our first child. We want to have a second. This isn't the ideal setting for us to be in. Like, we would like a yard, we would like a space for, to teach how to ride bikes and play toys and kick soccer balls and all of the stuff. And that wasn't the ideal time. And so looking at that, it was kind of like, okay, the next step for us is either to go get another apartment or start building this foundation. And fortunately for us, I had come out of GFC, the financial crisis, and was honestly a little timid at buying a house at the time, just because of what I had just been through. And fortunately was able to sit down and have the conversation in depth with her mom and dad at that time. And it started to make a lot of sense. And so we realized, hey, listen, this is probably the next step for us, is buying a home. And from there, it's we're going to go through the next step, but that for us was the why. That was what was going to happen.
You mentioned a couple of the big triggers: getting married or getting into a long-term relationship. More and more people choose not to get married, but they say, hey, we're going to be together long-term, and having children. So those are a couple of them. Age. So we had a couple of reports released this week. It was at the NAR, Jeb, that says the average age of a first-time buyer is 40. A lot of people, they'll call it, hey, I just turned 30 and I just feel like I got to be doing this. That age is getting older and older. There was another report that said it's more like 36, but whoever's numbers you're looking at, it's all survey data, but it's 35 plus. So it's more important that you do it at the right time versus by some magical target age. So Jeb, you had talked about the triggers that said, hey, we should consider doing this. But when you sat down and had that conversation with the in-laws, there was more that went into it. Well, how much money do we have to put into this? Have we saved up some money? Are our finances in a good place? Have we optimized our credit score? Do we have our debt under control? What does our incomes look like? What are our incomes going to look like? You guys had a changing situation, right? You went from 2 incomes. It was going to be 1 income. You guys made a decision that she was going to have her primary job as raising the kids. So these are the things that we want to make sure that you've gone through. You know why you're doing it. You know all of the building blocks that go into it. Because when we move to the next step and you are talking to a lender, whether you start with calling a lender, whether you start with a realtor like Jeb and he says, hey, have you been pre-approved? They introduce you to a lender. Now we're really going to get into numbers, but we need to have that solid foundation, because I'm always going to ask. The first thing we do, that first discovery call, is about those things. Well, what are you thinking? What is it that's important about that? And Jeb, or the buyer, is going to lay out exactly the story that you said there in 2012. So now we know what and why and how, and that we're in the right place, and we can move on to knowing your.
Well, Well, before we get to the numbers, Josh, let's talk about some things. If your time horizon in the current environment is, hey, listen, we're only going to be in this home like 2 years. I'm stationed in Oceanside, and chances are they're going to move me to Jacksonville, North Carolina. That's where I'm going to be. Should you be buying a home? That's a question that you have to ask. I mean, we talk about the right time in your life. We talked about my situation being, relationship stability. We're married, we were having kids, that sort of thing. But there are other things, right? We talk about time horizon. Time horizon is very, very important in this environment. There's a high likelihood that you don't see the appreciation that you've seen over the last 5 years going over the next 5 years, right? You might see home prices move sideways. Some markets out there, you could see home prices move slightly down. You might even see home prices move up at the rate of inflation, 3-4%, just depending on what's happening out there. So if you have a shorter term time horizon, it impacts, that the why a little bit more, but also, job changes, money in the bank. All of these things are important. And we're going to talk about some of that in the numbers, but it's not just about relationship stability. It's about financial stability. It's about, the time horizon, as we mentioned, and not even that, but just, hey, are you moving into a place that is going to fit your life, Josh, the next 5 to 7 to 10 years, right? If you're a couple and you're planning on having kids, looking at one bedroom condos or studios probably isn't the right move. And that's a conversation that's going to, move into the conversation with your real estate agent. Those are the questions that should be asking. But these are some things that you should be thinking about prior to probably ever having that conversation with your agent.
And as you were saying this, it kind of reminded me of Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. We have a hierarchy of home ownership. And can sound a little bit vague or soft and squishy, and it is, but it is the foundation. You need to do this. You need to go through this thinking with yourself, any co-borrower, anyone that's going to maybe be a gift donor helping you get into the property, just so we're all on the same page and we know that we've thought this through. It truly is the foundation for a successful transaction. So as we move into knowing your numbers, you may think, hey, this is just pre-approval. And it can be. Jeb mentioned that one of the first questions in that first call, as he's getting a feel for what you want, where you're at, what your hopes and dreams are, is, have you been through this conversation with a lender? And the thing that shocks me the most, Jeb, is we talk to a lot of people that reach out through the show, and they'll tell me, yeah, I've already been pre-approved, but everything you guys say on the show, I wanted to go through this process with you. Okay, cool. What were you approved for? I'm approved for $350,000. Okay, cool. What loan program? Well, I don't know. Okay, well, what was the interest rate? I don't know. Okay, did they give you a payment? Mm-mm. Did they tell you how much money you have to have? So what I want you to start with is, let's not focus or think in terms of what are the steps of this pre-approval process. The pre-approval is going to help you know your numbers, but let's think in terms of the outcome, because that's what's the value to you, right? When someone buys a drill, they don't want to drill, they want to put some holes in something. So when you get pre-approved, you don't want to get pre-approved. You want to know all of those numbers, and that's what you should walk away with. A comparison of a couple of options. And those options could be different loan programs. If you're doing minimum down, maybe it's a 3% conventional and a 3.5% FHA. If you're in an area where USDA might be a possibility, maybe it's that 3.5 FHA and the 0 down USDA. Sometimes, like, I get veteran borrowers. A veteran's 99.9% chance going to use VA financing. So the comparison isn't comparing the different loan program. It's saying, here's what this looks like at 0 points. Here's how low we could get it if you wanted to pay a point. Here's what we could do by bumping the rate a little bit and giving you money to cover your closing costs, so you don't have to come in as much. So that's really what the outcome is, and that's what is most important to you. So when you walk away from your pre-approval, what you should have is an understanding of what my options are, a visual comparison of all of those numbers for those programs. And what I tell people is, the numbers never lie. When they're laid out for you side by side, one of them is going to speak to you. And it may not be the option that I would choose or take or pick for you, but no one knows your situation like you, assuming you've done that ground level work of knowing your why and what you're doing.
Well, Josh, I think before we maybe got a little bit ahead of there, because we went from knowing your why to now you're having that conversation. I think there's some number stuff in there that's important to know. And that's what your budget actually is, right? I mean, I think the successful people we talk to, or the most successful, the people that end up saying, hey, listen, I know I can qualify for $1 million, but this is where I'm comfortable. The reason they know that is because they've actually outlined a budget of themselves. They've gone through their expenses. They know what they bring home. They know where their money goes. And so they've kind of put themselves in a position where they say, yeah, maybe I can do that. And maybe I will do that if the right property comes along, but this is where I'm comfortable. So, prior to having that conversation with Josh, if you have the conversation with Josh, it's at least in the initial stages where you should be going through your finances, figuring out where you're comfortable, because Josh is not going to tell you how much you can afford. He's going to tell you how much you can qualify to purchase. It is up to you as a home buyer to understand what you're comfortable spending, because Josh doesn't know all your numbers. He doesn't know how much you spend on childcare. He doesn't know how much you spend on date night or on groceries. That stuff doesn't show up on your credit report, right? Those are the things that you have to go through and know those numbers. And I think it's also important to understand, Josh, that when you're going from a renter to a home buyer, the payment is going to be higher. It is. It's that is the environment we're in. Now, there are some areas of the country years ago where it was kind of an even trade across the board, and it was absolutely easy decision. When I bought in 2012, even at that time, I think my rent payment, if I remember, Josh, was $2,200 a month. And the mortgage on that property with the HOA, tax, insurance was probably $3,500 to $3,800. And for me, it was like, oh, that's a pretty big jump. And it was. And I did that for a period of time. But guess what? Over time, not only did I become accustomed to that higher payment because it's just what it was, but rates went down. And at the end of that, Josh, that payment for everything was under $3,000. So not only had I gained appreciation, had I paid down principal, but I was also able to take advantage of a lower rate over those years and actually lower the payment lower than it was when I initially got the home. So I went from uncomfortable to slowly more comfortable over time to, hey, shit, this is a no-brainer, especially as rents and everything increased.
100%. And that transition from knowing your why to knowing your numbers, they kind of naturally transition into one another. What did we talk about? Talked about your job and your career. So I'm at my work. I kind of know what they pay me. I know what my annual bonus is, or I know what I'm on track for commissions next year. So you have a decent handle on that. Like you said, having done your budgeting ahead of time, so this is what I'm paying in rent. And in your situation, if rent was $2,200 and there wasn't an extra $1,400 around at the end of the month, probably wasn't realistic to look at a $3,500 monthly payment. So these are things that you can do that really don't have anything to do with talking to the loan officer. But once you pick up the phone and you call, that's where we're going to start. And what I can say is we have successful transactions for those who have not gone through any of this thinking in their head ahead of time, but it's a longer process and it can be a little bit more stressful for them because we're making them think about things they haven't been able to deliberate and think through on their own. The people that have the smoothest, easiest, most stress-free transaction are the ones who said, okay, here's where we're at. They volunteer up. I got $800 a month in childcare expense. They've gone through every last little bit. There's nothing that's going to jump out and surprise them. So you don't have to be that person forever, but this is a pretty big and important decision. So at least work your way through it here. So you're prepping for that call. We're going to talk a little bit about the workshop that we're going to do. And on that, we'll go in detail on knowing the numbers and exactly what that pre-approval process looks like. But it's basically taking your income, your assets, your debts, your goals of what you want to buy, and working it out to what are the financing options that you can be approved for and what do they look like in terms of monthly payment, cash to close. That's what that process looks like, so that you can now go, hey, I saw something in the app. I called Jeb. He said, yeah, let's talk about it, but get pre-approved. And now I see the numbers and everything's coming together. And you kind of start to see how when everything lines up, your stress starts to go down. You're always going to be kind of, your adrenaline's pumping at the beginning because you're like, I want to do this, but I have no idea what it means. I have no idea if I can do it. Every step of the way, we're filling in more information and making it easier and less stressful for you.
Well, before we talk about building your team, Josh, which is probably one of the more important parts of this process, let's talk about the workshop that we're doing. It's on December 9th. It is 5:30 Pacific Standard Time. It's going to be about 90 minutes. This episode here, roughly 30 minutes of your time, and it's teaching you how to buy a home surface level. That 90-minute workshop is going to teach you how to buy a home in a lot more detail. It's going to go through the steps. Some steps here we're not even covering, just to really take you down on a granular level so that when you leave, you feel comfortable with the process, you feel confident, you know what the next steps look like so that you're not scrambling and trying to figure out things and stressing out. So we'll put a link in the description of the video. We'll actually throw it here on the screen too. It is the educatedhomebuyer.com/workshop. If you head over there, there's a place for you to register information. It is free. Again, it is 90 minutes. It's the best value of your time if you are planning on buying a house in 2026. So make sure you check it out. So Josh, let's talk about the dream team. Let's talk about that process, what that looks like. We've talked a little bit about talking to the realtor. We talked a little bit about the mortgage person. Who do you contact first? Should you contact you? Should you contact me? Should you research it on Google and click the first link? What should you do?
It's funny. If you start with me and you call, we're going to go through all these numbers, and the last place we're going to leave it is, have you spoken with the realtor, or have you selected who you are going to work with yet? Sometimes the answer is, oh yeah, I've family friends done this forever, or hey, yes, I've been talking to a realtor. A lot of times it's no, we wanted to make sure we had our numbers in place first. And when they call you, sort of the front end of that conversation, or somewhere towards the front end of that conversation, is, have you been pre-approved?
Yeah.
Because before you even go too far into the details,
I mean, Josh, let me stop you there. It may seem a little standoffish from my side, but it's like I could spend 30 minutes, an hour on the phone with somebody that we don't even know is pre-approved, right? So it's like, let's pump the brakes a little bit. So one of the very first questions I ask is, hey, have you been through this process? Have you been pre-approved? Yes or no. If the answer is no, that is okay. Let's stop here, because I can't really do my job. I can't really help you without knowing these numbers. So the very first thing I want to do is get them in touch with a mortgage professional, whether it's you, whether it's somebody they have that they trust. So be it. Just make sure you're confident, know your numbers, and then let's bring it back to me and let's get granular at that point, because then it allows me to do my job in a lot more detail because we know what we're looking at, right? So if you call Josh, you're probably going to get your numbers up front and have a much easier conversation, a more confident conversation. You call me, we can have a conversation, but we really can't do anything without speaking to Josh first. So it's the chicken or the egg, but
chicken or the egg.
They both get you to the same place to some degree, but you're going to end up talking to the mortgage person, to get the bulk of it done to start.
And in answering the question in what you're looking for in both of those people, what I tell people, because if they found me, we're assuming, hey, we're going to do the loan, because that's just how it goes 95% of the time. But they haven't oftentimes made up their mind on the realtor. But what are you looking for? What I say is, how do I know it's going to be successful, a successful transaction, and it's going to go well for you? I will say the majority of realtors out there are not great, but I can say that the majority of realtors that I work with on transactions are. And that's largely because most people have a pretty good filter for who they're, and maybe I'm biased, Jeb, maybe this is survivor bias, that we have a lot of people who come through this show, the educated home buyer, who've educated themselves, who research, and aren't going to settle for a crappy realtor. But you refer a lot of listeners to the show, a lot of people that we work with in other states. And thankfully, coming through that filter, we have a pretty good experience. I have some clients down in San Diego right now, found their own realtor, but in one phone call, this person knows what they're doing. So from my end, because I deal with realtors all the time, it doesn't take a whole lot. A 5-10 minute conversation, you have a pretty solid handle on who you're working with. From your end, you want someone that's easy to get a hold of, someone who communicates, who keeps you updated, who has knowledge and experience. Doesn't mean they've been in the business for 30 years, but for the most part, I would be wary of someone who's relatively new in the business, unless they're part of a team, unless they have a mentor who's going to walk them through this. So those are some of the measures, and you're going to weight them appropriately for yourself. But what I can say is it's pretty hard for a transaction to go too far off the rails when you have a solid loan officer with an excellent pre-approval and a realtor that's a professional and knows what they're doing. Things happen, right, Jeb? Part of our life is how do we fix the problems when they come up, and how little stress does that present to the buyer? And I think that's the value of starting with those two pros. And maybe from that, walk through, like on my end, the appraisal team is going to come through us. If it's a refinance, the escrow and title team are going to come through us. But we're talking about buyers here in a transaction. How does the realtor help in terms of all of the things that come through, inspections, title companies, escrow, dealing with all of that stuff?
Well, Josh, I know we're going to go through a lot of that in the actual workshop itself. So, kind of keeping it surface level. It's we're a team, right? I don't. A lot of times, I don't know the mortgage person on the other side. I don't know the real estate agent on the other side. A lot of times, I do, but many times I don't. But we're cohesive. We have to work together. Communication. You've got to be able to have transparency and understand that even though they're representing the buyer or the seller in that case, and I'm representing the buyer or the seller, whatever the transaction is, that even though that's my client and the other one is not, that we're still kind of all doing something, the same goal. We all have the same goal of getting to the finish line with the least amount of stress, making sure, the transaction's fair, reasonable, everybody's happy at the end of the day. So really comes down to communication. Like you said, you don't have to have somebody that has 30 years of experience, but you do want somebody that does have experience in the business, that has sold properties in the current environment. Not somebody that just has their license and does this as a pastime, because there's a lot of them out there, but somebody that's active in the business, because things are changing fairly routinely at the moment. And you want to make sure somebody has their hand on the pulse of what's going on, so that you can make informed decisions, right? There's a lot of news just, kind of saying, hey, home prices are settling. It's a buyer's market, whatever. If you go into Huntington Beach at the moment in a certain price point, and that's your mindset, you're not going to have success. You're not, because that, for the majority, if you're under 1.5, just throwing some numbers out there, it's still pretty much a seller's market. So you got to know how to make offers accordingly in order to be successful in that environment. And so that's just a little bit of it, Josh. Again, we'll go into more detail as we get into the workshop, but it's important to find the right team, the right mortgage professional, the right real estate agent. A quick story. I think this is really good. I just remembered this. Somebody called me the other day and said, hey, Jeb, we have put an offer in on a property. And they called me and wanted to have a conversation about buying a house. And I said, oh, have you put in any offers out previously? And they said, yeah, we actually have. We put in, I referred this to somebody it was Dan. Dan called me, wanted an agent in Temecula area. So I referred him out to an agent there. And I asked him, I said, hey, have you put out any offers? He said, yeah. And I said, what was the experience? And he goes, well, the first experience was I put out an offer, and essentially my mortgage person, I guess, got in an argument with the seller and or their agent on the other side, and my offer basically got declined. And I'm like, how? Like, and thinking to myself, like, how does that even happen? But somehow there was a pissing match between two people, and his mortgage guy got in an argument with that person. So that was kind of a little short piece of the story. The other one, he put an offer in on new construction, and on the new construction property, the agent from the builder, he went to them directly, and they were going to represent him. And he basically said, hey, listen, I need some time to look through the contract and read the contract. And the agent, and basically what I got from the conversation was like, hey, listen, you can, like, there's no reason to do that, because the contract is the contract. So you should just sign it. Like that. It is
the 100-something page contract from
the builder. You just sign it because that's what everybody else does. And it's like, no, that's not how I operate. Like, give me some time to do my due diligence. So having an agent, the right agent, is very, very important. I know I got a little off topic there, but it's just, those are two examples from one person that just happened. So yeah. Anyway,
100%, and that's not just the right agent, the right lender. You want your lender building bridges, not burning them down for you. So that's important here. So we're not going to go too far into detail today. Like you said, we've got 90 minutes to go through all of this, but on the workshop, we're going to go through what that home buying process is actually going to look like, A to Z. We've talked a little bit here about pre-approval, but we're going to go into detail of what that looks like. We talked about partnering with your realtor. You're going to walk us through, what does that actually mean? You start with a questionnaire, you get some information. There's a whole long, involved process there, but you're going to go through that for us. And then really, the funny part is the workshop is front-loaded. Josh is mainly on the front end of what does it take to get the numbers and everything dialed in. And then the back end is more you. So besides, just partnering with you and what that looks like, what else are you going to be going through on the way?
Well, Josh, we talk about how to make offers. A lot of people don't understand what that process looks like. Hey, once you find a house, what actually happens? What does it look like to actually write an offer? What goes into that offer? What are the things that I need to know kind of up front, so that when I'm ready to make an offer, I can make kind of quick decisions, because it's a lot of the documents that you're going to sign are template documents, right? They're boilerplated. There's not a lot you can change in them, but there are some key things that you have to make decisions on in order to get that offer sent over to the other side, to even, be in the running, if you will. And so we talk about some of those things to go through there. We talk about the next stages. Okay, once my offer gets accepted, what does that process look like? What does escrow look like? What is escrow? We talk about, everything from the earnest money deposit that goes into the contract to releasing contingencies, and kind of all of this stuff kind of blends in together. But it's a conversation a lot of people don't know. Like, the agents don't take the time to explain what is actually happening, and people come out of the process. And honestly, Josh, before we started the Educated Home Buyer podcast, how this all originated was, I did loans for the better part of 10 years, sold real estate, and I'll tell you, people have no idea when the process is over what the hell just happened. They have no idea. They're like, I just bought a house and I don't know how I did it. I don't know what the steps were, because it was never explained. And I think we're in an environment now, we're in this kind of realm, if you will, where people want to know what processes look like. They want to know what they're signing, why they're signing them, all of that. And so this workshop is essentially taking you through that, everything from talking about inspections, contingency removal, we talked about that, to what actually happens after the keys, and then how that finalizes in with the loan process.
100%. It's like I said, most of our clients, the end result is, wow, that was spectacularly easy. Closed one for a listener just 2 days ago, and his email yesterday was, wow, from start to finish, our first call to moving in is 2 months, and it was super easy. And that's not by accident. It's because of a designed process, and it's because of 30 years of working with people just like you, where we know the questions that are going to come up. We all want to believe we're super unique, but when we look at hundreds and thousands of buyers over the years, they all have the same questions, different needs, different goals, but similar questions, and it's a very similar process. So having an engineered process to make that happen smooth, easy, and stress-free is what the Educated Homebuyer is about, is what Jeb's business is about, is what my business is about. So with that, we would love for you to join us on that workshop on December 9th. So go out and definitely check out the page. There's some more info. If 30 minutes of listening to the two of us isn't enough info about what we're going to go over, there's an entire page with giving you all of the details of what we're going to go over.
Yeah, free, 90 minutes. If you're finding this after that webinar, which is possible, just because of how YouTube and algorithms work, the video will still be available by play. So you can put in your information. We'll either have another one coming at that point that you can register for, so there'll be a new date there, or you'll get a copy of the actual one that we recorded there. So either way, the information will be valid. Take the time, go over there, check it out. But until then, make sure you buy right, borrow smart, build wealth. Adios.
Amigos.